Without further ado, I want to welcome everybody to CCI North Alberta's webinar on condo security. My name is Alan White. I'm the Executive Director for CCI North Alberta. At least I was before we started this webinar. Before I introduce our presenters for today, I just want to thank our sponsors for today's event. We have BFL Canada Insurance Services, as well as Keller Engineering. We thank them for their support, not only for the webinar today, but for their support throughout our year end. So for today's webinar, just to let everybody know, we have everybody on mute. Questions can be asked through the Q&A section that's located at the bottom of your screen. We'll do our best to get to as many questions as we can. We've expanded the time today to allow for more questions. However, with the caveat that we want to make sure that the questions that are being asked are pertinent to today's webinar. I know anytime you get a lawyer and a police person in the room, you want to ask a myriad of different questions, but we got to focus on the task at hand for today. So without further ado, I am going to turn the screen over to our first presenter after I introduce Constable McKinnon. Constable McKinnon's been with the police force since 2014 after working 5 years as a peace officer with the inner city hospitals. His current role with the police department right now is in community engagement. So he works on various initiatives such as publication on crime prevention strategies, attending community crime prevention events, community league meetings, and responding to other community concerns that come up. He's also the proud father of 2 children and president of his own community league in his spare time. So without further ado, I'm going to turn the screen over to Constable Kenny McKinnon from Edmonton Police, and he'll start with our first part of the presentation. Constable McKinnon, it's all yours.
Thank you very much. Give me 1 second to see if I can make this screen sharing thing work with my presentation. Tell me if that popped up.
We're all good.
Wonderful. So I'll get started. So this presentation is hopefully going to be short and sweet so that we can kind of get to the meat and potatoes of what your guys' questions and concerns are. None of the stuff that we'll be talking about today will be kind of rocket science and shouldn't come as too much of a surprise, but it can instill some, obviously, things that maybe we've forgotten over time or have become complacent in. So as Alan already pointed out, I'm a community liaison with Edmonton Police. If you're unaware of what this crime map right here is, if you go to our Edmonton Police website, you're actually able to review and see different neighborhoods within the city of Edmonton, and there's these 8 crime indicators right here. You can actually see statistics over the past couple of years and over a set number of days, what type of crimes have happened in your neighborhood. Had a lot of questions around the neighborhood crime mapping tool. It is not updated minutely or not updated up to the minute or up to the day or sometimes even up to the week. Sometimes as it is just a general knowledge and does not accurately actually pinpoint exactly where the crime happens. Obviously for some personal issues and stuff that may come up there, or dangers to other people and stuff. But it gives you a general area that some of these crimes have happened in, and anybody's able to see that. Okay. So some things that you may or may not be aware of. 1 in 5 Canadians will be a victim of crime this year. 70% of that is property crime, and 30% of that is violence. And new ways of committing crimes are obviously constantly being discovered as time goes on. As we roll into that, one of the big things that we need to talk about is technology and the difference in today's age versus even 10 years ago or 20 years ago, before the invention of obviously the smartphone or camera or cameras being more widely used. And then tools like YouTube or data sharing websites. Now that these type of things are available. You may be able to look up all sorts of different things on how to make the best quiche or funny cat videos. Unfortunately, these things can also be used in the negative effect, where how do I break into certain types of locks? How do I disable certain types of security systems? Break into certain cars, and all of that type of thing has obviously greatly educated our criminal aspect of our neighborhoods and stuff, because that information is readily available and in their hands, as opposed to before, someone would need to physically teach you how to do these type of things, as opposed to just being able to Google it. So we've found over the years that obviously frauds and online schemes and those type of crimes have obviously increased, as opposed to the one-off like purse or a wallet snatch and grabs and trying to steal the physical cash that you have is not as prevalent as it used to be. So knowledge is always nice, action is better. By attending this course and stuff, you may now have an advantage over those that are not here. This will be different than most presentations given to you, and you can't eliminate all risk of crime, but we can greatly reduce it. As I said, no ninja moves or secret weapons are going to be revealed here today. So we'll talk about some of these key points here coming up in the next little bit. So vehicle crime. So we have these all valuables remove tags that can get that you can place in your cars. Those are only helpful if you actually remove all the valuables from your cars. I think that kind of goes without saying, but the thing that a lot of people forget is that it's not what's just valuable to you. You have to think about it as what's valuable to a person who has nothing or very little. So you may not value that change that's in your cup holder in your car, but to a person who has nothing, that is or could be very valuable to them. And though you may not think anything of it, when this person now breaks your window or whatever, which will probably cost you around $500 to repair, that does affect you, as opposed to you really don't care all that much about the change that was stolen out of your cup holder. So when we say everything is fair game, we mean everything is fair game. I've seen people's cars broken into for iPhone chargers, for a pair of shoes, for stinky workout clothes, for a suitcase that was inside there, for sunglasses, for hats, all sorts of different reasons that people will break into cars. So when we say all valuables removed, everything's out of sight, everything's out of mind. One of the things that we've seen over time that has increased, and we've put it out in our social media quite a bit, is people or criminal element will break into vehicles, take the garage door openers that are left inside there and the vehicle documents which have your address on it, and then they will take that and go to your actual address, because now with your vehicle documents they have your address. A lot of people have detached garages on their homes, and you can use obviously that now garage fob to open up that detached garage and get inside. Not only can you steal things from inside that detached garage, but you can also potentially gain access to the whole house, because a lot of people do not lock that inner door or whatever in between their garage and their actual home. And people have keyed in on this. So some ways that you can obviously combat this: take your garage door openers with you. So some other things that have come out over the years is you are actually allowed to take pictures now of your insurance and registration. Not your license. You need to have your license with you, obviously, but your insurance and registration you are allowed to take pictures of and have those with you, as opposed to having the physical copies inside your vehicle. Now, it has been put out in the media, and lots of stuff has been put out about this and stuff. So it's not new. It's been around for about, I believe it's about a year and a half, coming up on 2 years now that this has been available. As far as license plates go, what we see happening most often with license plates is, say I have a black Ford F-150. As a bad guy, I will steal a black Ford F-150 and find another black Ford F-150 and swap license plates on it, because the person who had their original vehicle stolen will report that license plate stolen and their vehicle stolen all at the same time. Whereas somebody who's now had their plate swapped with a stolen vehicle will now, their vehicle will show that they're driving around in a stolen vehicle with a stolen plate, but their vehicle is obviously their own. Meanwhile, the person who swapped plates is now driving around with a valid license plate, or what appears to be a valid license plate. So as part of your daily routine as you're going out to your car, how many people know their license plates? If you don't know your license plate, learn it, take a picture of it, and just check it as you're going to your vehicle each day, especially if you leave your car on a city street, or if you leave it in a parkade of some sort, in a public spot, and not inside your own parking lot or inside your own garage. Make sure that you check that plate daily, just making sure that it is your own. And obviously, I already kind of beat it to death there, but if you wouldn't leave it on the hood of your car, you shouldn't be leaving it visible inside your car at the end of the day, is what we're trying to get at. So break and enters, these tend to be very fast and furious. So check locks, avoid advertising things in your garage by leaving your garage door open. Be visible of items, or be aware of items that are visible through maintenance or through windows and in your garage and in your backyard. See all too often people that just store bikes in their backyard, and they either don't have a lock on their garage, on their the fence around their backyard whatsoever, or they think that these people won't go over top of a fence in order to get a couple bicycles that are just left in the backyard. People will do stuff like that. Pick up mail often. Be careful of hidden keys. Again, most people know that if I'm going to hide a key, they hide it under a mat or a rock or a plant or something at the front door, and they will try these type of things as they're moving around or whatever, generally late at night, to be able to gain access to buildings. As far as the actual events themselves, they tend to be fast and furious. They want to do it when you're not home, because that's obviously the easiest and the least likely they'll be caught. One of the things that we always suggest is most people store their keys and their wallets and all their kind of like important items like that right near the entrance of their door. Again, if I kick a door open, I can steal a set of keys and a purse or whatever and run out to your car that's parked on the drive or on your driveway and drive away before you've even realized what is going on. It makes it very easier for them to be able to do that. So bring those items maybe just a little bit further inside your house. Have a basket that's somewhere maybe in the main room that's not visible and stuff by windows or anything like that. I can't stress enough to record the serial numbers of valuables, and don't record it on something that could easily be stolen itself. So we've had a couple people who have recorded all their serial numbers on their laptop. That document was not uploaded to the cloud or an external server of some sort, and then their laptop gets stolen. So all their serial numbers are no longer available, unfortunately. So one of the things that we talk about the most is a lot of these items either are sold online or pawned. With pawn shops in particular, we have a system that is actually linked with the Edmonton Police's system. And if we have serial numbers for valuables, let's say a bicycle is stolen, and the serial number on that bike is 123456. If that item is pawned in a pawn shop and you report it to police and that provide us with that serial number, when those items show up in pawn shops, they have to put it into their system and record that information. And then our two systems link up and actually tell us that this item has been pawned at this store. When people pawn property, they have to provide an ID at the time of pawning that actual property. So we have now somebody to go after who pawned that property, and we are able to do all of that. But that all obviously kind of relies on the ability to have those serial numbers and stuff to be able to actually prove that that item is yours or a member of your family's. Personal robberies, they don't happen. Again, if we go back to our percentages and stuff, 70% is property crime, 30% is actual violence. So they don't happen all that often here in Edmonton, but if they do happen, here's some tips and things to think of. So if obviously you're being followed or anything like that, there might be this intent maybe to assault or do a robbery of some sort. All too often on buses or LRTs or public transit or public spaces, people are not paying attention to what they're doing because they have things called cell phones or whatever, and they're plugged into them and they're walking around not paying attention to what's going on around them. So be attentive to your surroundings. Keep one earbud out and stuff. So if somebody is trying to talk to you or if somebody is trying to sneak up on you, there's a potential that you'll actually hear it as opposed to just hearing whatever is in your ears at that particular time. If you believe you're being followed, whether you're in a car or on foot, call 911 and move towards safety instead of running from the threat. It's kind of like a game of cat and mouse, it seems like, for these guys. If the mouse runs very quickly, the cat is going to pounce. Whereas if you walk calmly, so if you drive towards a police station or whatever while you're calling 911 and inform us, we can be ready or whatever to obviously stop that vehicle and find out what's going on. Do not drive back to your home or whatever and then call 911 from the safety of your own home, because now you've led them potentially to your home and your other loved ones that are there, and we don't want to do that. It's much better for you to keep driving, call us and tell us what is going on, and we'll make our way to you. If you can't make your way to us and you're on foot, move towards a place like a 7-Eleven or any type of store that you are able to walk inside and there's either lots of people or you can lock a door behind you. We've had multiple instances of people walking around in our downtown core and they start being followed, and then they go into a 7-Eleven and they lock the door behind them. Meanwhile, they're on the phone to us, and there has yet to be an incident where the 7-Eleven was like, no, let's let this person inside. You can't lock that door. As soon as you explain what's going on, they're generally very good about understanding what and calling, if not a second time, to us or whatever, letting us know what's going on. The safety in numbers rule is just a general rule of thumb. If you're walking on your own, there's obviously a higher likelihood of some type of offense happening. Safety in numbers and that rule, if you are walking and there's two people or whatever, you're 70% less likely to be bothered. Walking with 3 people or more or whatever, you're 90% more less likely to be bothered in the larger groups that you can be in. Confrontations. So most violence stems from verbal confrontations that become physical. Now, when I say raise your hands in front of your face, what I'm not asking you to do is do this. What I'm asking you to do is keep your hands up and ready. If you have your hands in your pockets or in behind your back or down at your waist, it is almost physically impossible if somebody decides to take a swipe at you or a swing or anything like that to bring your hands up to defend yourself if you have your hands down at your side. If you have your hands up and you're talking to somebody, the difference and the milliseconds that it takes for you to be able to cover up or whatever from here versus trying to grab your hands out of your pockets and bring them up and protect yourself, it matters, because it is the difference between them reacting, you perceiving that reaction, and then actually moving your body to defend yourself. So ways that you can also pay attention to some of this stuff, or what's happening, is people get very focused on the verbal that is coming out of their mouths, whereas they're not watching their hands or their hips or what they're doing with the rest of their body. So pay attention to their body language, pay attention to their hands. Where are their hands? Are they in their pockets, or are they grabbing for other things? And the best thing you can do is keep your distance and utilize obstacles. If you can get to a place of safety where there's more people or any of those type of options or whatever, those are always better than pushing into obviously this altercation. Personal robbery kind of goes into like the being followed, like we talked about earlier. So it comes in all ages and appearances. Distraction tactics are often used. They want to make it seem like a very casual conversation when they're doing this type of stuff. And when we say it comes in all ages and appearances, it really does. Last summer, if any you keep, I guess, abreast of what's going on in the news, we had youth or whatever on our LRTs that seemed to be making it a game of assaulting individuals as they were going downstairs and different things like that. So it's not just our our population or whatever that's using drugs or mental health or homeless or any of these different types of people, it can come from all sorts of areas. So you have to be alert and obviously be attention to your surroundings. They always seek to try to create or stationary individuals or isolate you. It is the best way. So the best example is down on the LRT. You're the only one down there. Now you're kind of a prime target and stuff because there isn't a whole lot of cell service and stuff down there if there is any. And if you're the only one down there and there's nobody else around, well, nobody's going to hear you make any noise. So that's where we're walking in groups, being alive or whatever to obviously what's going on. If you see something like that, or you're walking into an environment like that or down on the LRT, maybe wait up above for that LRT to actually show up before you're making your way down there. Obviously, depending on the amount of traffic that's going on. Should the unthinkable happen and somebody, again, is now using force against you, what we highly suggest is not to resist giving up the items. Again, if you think of it from the perspective of the percentage of crime, 70% of it is property related, 30% of it is actually violence related. So if you're in a situation where somebody's after cigarettes, a purse, a wallet, a cell phone, or something like that, items can be replaced. It is a whole lot harder or whatever to repair or help people or whatever once they've been hurt or damaged or anything like that. So being able to get yourself to a safe place is worth losing a cell phone. So as it says, throw the item to escape. If you're going to be going up the set of stairs or whatever that's behind you, send the phone or whatever item it is that they're looking after in the opposite direction that you're going to be fleeing. And obviously make as much noise as you can and to try to draw attention to the area so that you can either get bystanders, hopefully they'll come help. At the very least, somebody hopefully will call police and we can start making our way to finding where you are and what is going on. We've seen it time and time again where people fight over the littlest items or whatever, and I understand that they have sentimental value sometimes to you or they're important to you, but it's not worth it. Depending on what you're running into, it may not be worth fighting over it. Now, if somebody walks up to you, and what I'm not saying is somebody walks up and says, hey, give me your phone, and you just say, here you go, and you just hand it over. That is not what I'm suggesting. I'm saying, should the worst happen and you are cornered and violence is imminent or it is happening, you need to think about what is important here right now. And I am the most important thing that needs to get out of this, not my phone or the other item maybe that they're after. Should it be one of those cases where it's the 30% and it's a violent related crime, there's a lot of confusion about what you can and cannot do. It's a very, very simple way of understanding it. You are allowed to use as much force as necessary to stop whatever attack is happening to you that you deem reasonable. Once the person is under control or whatever, then that violence needs to stop. So I use a very generic explanation. If somebody's breaking into your house and you have no way of getting away, you are stuck within that house and you can't get away, and they're crawling in through your window, and you take a bat and you hit them over the head and you knock them out, and that is where it ends. Most likely you're not going to see any repercussions and stuff coming from that because, again, you used force to stop the person who was trying to harm you or do you some type of harm in that particular case. Now, where we run into issues when you are doing this in the same scenario, you hit the person with the bat, but you're really upset, and then you decide to hit them 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 more times, and now things have gone a little bit too far. Obviously, that is a gross overuse of force in those particular cases. So it's not unreasonable. It's not. A lot of people have asked, like, well, can I hit them with keys, or am I allowed to punch them? Again, I can't tell you in what's in this situation what you can and cannot do. You need to judge the situation for yourself. And if you are in that type of danger and there's no way to get away, you are cornered, and violence is imminent or is happening to you, you can use force in order to protect yourself. Just obviously use it within reason and don't go above and beyond what is necessary. I should go without saying, avoid carrying large sums of money and different things like that. So when you are calling us, when things happen, we need as much detail as you possibly can. We understand that it's difficult to do under stress, but all too often we have somebody that calls in that says, hey, somebody just robbed me. It was a male or whatever wearing all black. In the middle of winter, a male wearing all black is very hard to distinguish or whatever because everybody's wearing some type of black coat, whatever, and unfortunately can't stop everybody within the city of Edmonton to try to find the person that robbed you. So try to pay attention to or key in on things that can't be easily changed. So tattoos, the way that the person talks, the shape of their head or the structure of their face or anything like that. Clothing can be changed immediately after a crime. A lot of these guys will have one set of clothing on. After they do a crime, they switch to another set. So when you get keyed on clothing, that tends to change. But even if we can't find this person initially and we're able to ID them later on, keying in on those details will help later on in a photo lineup or for court purposes. Some things that you guys can watch for and report to us. So vehicles frequently stopping and meeting for short periods of time, unusual amounts of pedestrian traffic or vehicle traffic to a residence. Report such activity with detail or whatever to the Edmonton Police. You can also go through Crime Stoppers if you are uncomfortable with reporting it to police. If you report it, the more information is better. So if you tell me that a blue car or whatever stops out in front of this residence every single day and somebody grabs a duffel bag, you can't give me a time, a description of the actual car, maybe a plate or anything like that. That's harder to follow up on and kind of be able to collaborate later on. But the nice thing is, again, with technology, we do have some benefits now. Most of these items, from the safety of your own home, from a window and stuff, yeah, you can zoom in and take pictures of plates, take pictures of people, and report this type of stuff to us, and we can review it and look into it and potentially do something about it. What I am not suggesting that you do is, if you have a problem with your neighbor or anything like that, and you think maybe they're a drug dealer, chasing them down the street, holding your phone up, saying that you're recording them is not the way, obviously, to go about this. But if you think that there is a criminal element to something that's happening in your residence or in one of your buildings and stuff, you can take pictures or whatever and provide that to us, and that helps us out a ton. So when you're reporting incidents, there's a couple different ways that you can. A lot of people call 911 for vulnerable persons that require transport to a shelter, but 211 actually can field those type of calls, and they will send out a Hope Mission van or the mobile assistance van and stuff to take these people to a shelter. Now, if you believe this person is imminently at risk or they're in medical distress, obviously that is still a 911 call. This I'm talking about is the same Joe Blow or whatever is always sleeping in your lobby at the same time of day. He's not harmed anybody. It's irritating that he is in the lobby or he is in this particular location all the time, but he's not in danger. He's not harmed anybody. He just needs to be taken to a place where he could be taken care of. 211 is the best for that. For anything that is not urgent or not a crime in progress, we have a non-emergency number. That's the 780-423-4567 number. For that, you will go through a list of questions or whatever in regards to maybe being able to divert the calls from police. So whether it's an animal bylaw related issue or parking related issue or various other things. It takes time to go through, listen to all the options and make your way through, because sometimes it isn't actually a police officer that is required to come to this type of event. And we try to divert those calls or whatever before they end up making its way to us. Please reserve 911 for crimes in progress or people that are at risk of danger. Unfortunately, we still to this day receive multiple 911 calls for things that are not crimes. And I'm sure a lot of people have heard about them, but cat stuck up in a tree, 911 call because my neighbor is making too much noise and he's frustrating me. Like, these are not 911 related calls and stuff. That's disorder or things that can be reported through our non-emergency line. And what we do end up having happen is because we have such a high volume of non-emergent calls coming in, very often 911 lines end up getting tied up, and sometimes people end up being on hold for over a minute and stuff, waiting to get through to 911 when an actual serious incident is happening. So we don't want that to happen. So as a community, we need to be good about making sure that we're using the right numbers. I'll talk about this very briefly. So a lot of people wonder why it takes us a long time sometimes to come to their call. And the way that our system is set up, it's not secret or anything like that. It's the highest priority calls or whatever are dispatched first. And after that, we start getting to the non-emergency calls. So those first 3 calls are our highest priority type items. So person at risk is maybe somebody being beat up at this exact time. Property at risk. This is not somebody who threw a rock through your window a couple days ago and you need your property, you need to report this. This is somebody who's throwing rocks through your window as we speak or damaging your vehicle as we speak. So it's happening right now. Just occurred would be something like somebody just committed a theft or robbery, and if we get there sooner than later, there's a higher likelihood that we're going to catch this person. A priority 4 would be like somebody broke into my garage last night and stole a bunch of items from there. Nobody's in danger. That information still needs to be collected, but it's an important event that we need to obviously get to, but it is not as high as priority as those first 3. And general complaints will be things like noise complaints or concerns, neighbor disputes, and those type of things. There's a lot of tools. Apparently there's a spelling mistake on there too in contacts. So if you look at our website, most of the tools that people will talk about or police officers will talk about are on our Edmonton Police website, and there are links to each of them. So crime-free multi-housing, CPTED, which is kind of target hardening your property. The neighborhood crime mapping tool, like I talked about earlier, is on there. There's an option for online reporting for certain types of crimes. We list all of our assist IDs where we want the neighborhoods and stuff to actually help us identify people that might be doing crimes. And Bike Index is an online free bike registry for your bikes, for your serial number. So if your bike is ever stolen, you have that information tracked, because bike theft in Edmonton is a very, very prominent thing. In closing, where there's obviously 3 elements that we're trying to deal with when it comes to motivations for crime. So there's motivation, target, and opportunity. We need you guys to work on, obviously, the opportunity and the target side of things. If there isn't an opportunity or you aren't a target because you have taken this time to do some of these things, then you make it hard for them to actually be able to commit crimes. In this particular case, we work on the motivation, the addictions, the debts, the mental health problems and stuff with our community partners. And in closing, conceal valuables, minimize isolation, watch for suspicious activity, minimize or eliminate distractions as much as possible, and avoid complacency. I think I will hand this over to Alan.
And you will. Thank you so much, Constable McKinnon. Just before we get to the Q&A portion of the first half of our presentation today, Beverly, I believe we've got a poll question that you wanted to post up here quickly, and we'll see how our technology is faring. Oh, look at that. So our poll question is, how concerned are you about criminal activity occurring within your complex? Options are very concerned, somewhat concerned, or not too concerned. So we'll let everybody answer that right now who's online. And then we'll give you the results here shortly and move on to the first question. So it looks like it's kind of neck and neck here. All right, we will end polling now. So the results, how concerned are you about criminal activity occurring within your complex? Number 1 was somewhat concerned with 46% of the vote. Very concerned was 39% of the vote. And not too concerned was 16% of the vote. So thank you very much for participating in our first poll. I'll just get to a couple of questions that were asked in advance of the presentation for Constable McKinnon to answer, and then I've got a few other questions that have come up since we started the presentation. First question is regarding reporting acts of vandalism, theft, disturbance, and break and enter within the property. So the question is, should we be making a written complaint every time, or is this unnecessary time and paperwork with no real benefit?
So that one's very important. So yes, reporting is very important to us. The example that I'll give in this particular case is on in several instances, we will see multiple break and enters in a neighborhood. Now, in your particular case, maybe nothing was stolen, or you didn't have any video of an incident, or something was stolen, but you have no evidence to provide or whatever that would particularly help the police or whatever identifying these people. So people tend not to end up reporting it to us. When you don't report that, what ends up happening is your neighbor or a couple people a few houses down may have had the exact same incident as you, and they are thinking the same way as you, but they actually have video of the incident. So what we see is when people actually report things and report things all together or whatever, we're able to do a lot more and be able to track the routes that these guys are taking and the times at which these occurrences are happening, so that we can come into the neighborhood and track these people down or whatever, on top of sometimes identifying them. I experienced this personally in the Oliver business area, where we had 4 businesses that were broken into specifically, and their safes were targeted. There was only 4 businesses that reported this happening, but upon doing door-to-doors with other businesses, it turned out there was almost 20 plus stores that had this happen. So there was another 16 stores that had this happen, but did not take the time to report it to police. If I had just gone with that base information and only charged this person for the 4 charges, that is not as strong of a case or whatever come court time as when I brought it forward to the court and said that there was 20 businesses affected by this person. So you can see how the difference or whatever in, well, it's not really worth it, or I didn't have evidence, or I didn't have video and stuff, so I'm not going to report it. I didn't need video in most of these particular cases because it was the same targeted attempt around the same time, or the same person was seen on camera multiple times, and it was in the exact same area over and over and over again. So we're able to put that type of stuff together with that type of information. So yes, please report it. If you don't always have to call it in. Sometimes if you don't have that evidence, you can do it simply by submitting an online report, like I talked about. That is more than okay if there is no evidence for us to collect, but we document what has happened and what things have gone missing, what damage was done, and potentially we can link that back to a suspect later on.
All right. Next question was asked in regards to the Edmonton Police Service internal crime map, which you showed the link on the at the end of the last slide. Does the general public have access to that crime map? Yes,
you can go onto that website and look up that crime map yourself.
Okay. Another question we got in: what are thieves looking for when they steal mail?
When they steal mail, it depends on the person. You have different people that do different things. So some of them look for access cards for your like a new visa or anything like that, that hopefully they'll be able to try to open up in your name. Other ones are looking for checks made out to you potentially, and they're going to try to pretend to be you by taking your mail and going and depositing that mail into somebody else's account. So we've seen a rash of this recently, with obviously a lot of funding coming out from different levels of government and checks being mailed out. So a lot more mailboxes have been broken into or whatever, trying to target that type of thing. One way to combat this is, we've talked about it a lot, empty your mailbox frequently. And a lot of mailboxes have these little windows in them or whatever that actually show how much how much mail is inside, those ones are generally the ones that are targeted because you can see that there's nothing either in this mailbox or there is a ton of stuff and this thing is overflowing, and they tend to target the ones that are overflowing.
Okay, next question is, will the police come out and inspect a condo building to identify possible break-in sites?
Yes, so that's part of the CEPTED that I talked about, so target hardening. On our Edmonton Police website, there's a contact, and the constable that runs that program does exactly that. They come out and talk to you about, hey, these are some things that other properties have run into, and here's some solutions or whatever that other properties have used to prevent that particular crime from happening. And it doesn't cost you anything. If you want to do the training, the Edmonton Police puts the training on for anybody who wants to actually attend that. That, I believe, does have a cost to it or whatever to go through the training yourself, but for us to come out and just review it with you, it does not.
Okay, next question is, realizing that you work with the Edmonton Police and we're talking about a major city here, but in terms of what you've spoken about today, how much of this is applicable in a small town situation?
Small towns have obviously crime too. Your rural crime generally looks a little bit different than your bigger city crime. So in a rural setting, you may not see it as frequently happening in a neighborhood because, to be frank, whatever, buildings are spaced out a whole lot farther apart and stuff. So it's not easy to walk from house to house to house when there's a whole row of houses like there is in the city of Edmonton. So the crime is a little bit different, but it generally is along the same lines of most of it is property related crime, and less of it is actually the violent side.
Just clarification, did you state that it's acceptable to carry a phone photo of your vehicle registration instead of a hard copy?
I did, yep.
Okay. And we've had a number of these similar questions before we get on to the discussion on surveillance camera, but how effective security cameras are, whether they're in the building or in the parkade, are there more factors more factors than just a deterrent? And what can you relate to the effectiveness of security cameras from your perspective?
So gone are the days of putting up a camera and us thinking that the person is going to see the camera and then decide not to do the break-in or anything like that. Unfortunately, with the increase in technology, criminals have become numb to that effect or whatever with cameras. That does not mean by any means whatever the cameras are ineffective. In some cases, yes, it does still make them think twice or whatever, but not to the same degree as it may have years ago, because everybody has a cell phone on them nowadays. Anybody can be videotaped. Most businesses have video cameras. On top of city streets have traffic cams and all sorts of different things that are out there constantly monitoring and looking at this type of stuff. So it's not the same as we used to think. If I put a camera up, this person won't do crime. That being said, as far as a tool for us to be able to identify the person who is doing the crime in that business or scenario or building or anything like that, they are instrumental in being able to help us on that side of things. So less more towards the prevention side, more towards being able to catch and hold accountable the person who is actually doing the crime in this particular area is what they're more effective for.
Okay, and the last question here, and we'll move on. With the sensitive racial movement today, reporting a crime or disturbance, you mentioned tattoos, gender, however, is describing race or skin color acceptable? I think this would be important information.
Yes, it is important information. If I am coming into an area and trying to identify who has just maybe robbed you or broken through the front door, if you tell me a person has robbed you, well, how would you be able, as a police officer, to identify anybody in the area as you're moving into that area. There is no way or whatever to identify anybody without any type of description. What I'm not saying is that the way in people need to describe them or whatever needs to be insensitive or anything like that. And mistakes can be made under stress as far as what they thought they saw versus what is actually there. But paying attention to things that are hard to change about a person and stuff, as opposed to clothing or anything like that, is important for us being able to ID suspects later on. And if this role was reversed and you were the person who was a victim of some type of crime, if you were to call us and you wanted to describe the person who had done this horrible thing, and we said, no, you can only say that it was a person, that wouldn't make any reasonable sense. We want to know, obviously, what you observed so that we can now try to use that to catch the person maybe fleeing the area, whether it's in a vehicle or another mode of transportation or on foot or anything like that. So it is important or whatever to have details about what has happened during the crime or whatever that just took place. Yes.
Okay, thanks very much, Constable McKinnon. We'll move on here. Beverly, if you want to put the poll question out, and I'll introduce our next presenter at the same time. So the question we're asking is, does your corporation have a privacy officer and a privacy policy? We'll let that go on. So our second portion here is going to be talking more specifically in terms of privacy issues with PIPA and surveillance cameras. We're very pleased to have Erin Berney from a condominium lawyer with Field Law. Erin is also a condominium owner. She's been an owner since 2005 and has served on her board in a variety of different positions. She was admitted to the bar in 2013, and currently her primary focus is condominium law, where she assists corporations, boards, owners, tenants, managers, and developers on a broad scope of issues. In her spare time, Erin enjoys reading a good book, playing golf, piano, and guitar, very multi-talented, as well as spending time with her family, friends, and her cat, Winston. So Erin, just before I turn it over to you, we'll just share our results on the question, does your corporation have a privacy officer and a privacy policy? Neither has, 33% of the people have stated they have neither. Privacy officer only is 14%. Privacy policy only is 8%. Yes to both is 22%, and unsure of their corporation is 23%. So thank you very much for everybody for answering. And now, without further ado, Erin, I will turn the presentation over to you.
Thank you, Alan. Hi. So that's interesting responses, because one of the things I'm going to be talking about today is the requirements under the Alberta Personal Information Protection Act and how they apply to condominium corporations. And two things in there jump out at me. Number one, organizations, including condominium corporations, are actually required to have privacy policies in place. And they're also required to have privacy officers, or a designated person that will deal with personal information that they control. So, just jumping into this. So the PIPA, as it's called, the Personal Information Protection Act, does apply to condominiums. So condominiums are actually required to follow a certain set of prescribed conditions in order to collect, use, and disclose personal information belonging to individuals that access their building. This can include owners, tenants, other residents, even contractors, personnel, employees, but anybody that comes and goes into your building. So PIPA, however, does not apply to individuals. It only applies to organizations. So this imposes a positive duty on condominium corporations to protect the personal information of their residents and other people that they collect. One of those responsibilities is that condo corporations are only allowed to collect, use, and disclose for purposes that are considered reasonable, and only to the extent necessary and reasonable for that particular purpose. What is reasonable, of course, will always vary depending upon the circumstances. PIPA prohibits organizations from collecting, using, and disclosing personal information without first acquiring consent from the individual, unless you can find an exception for obtaining consent under PIPA itself. So there's certain sections that you can look at that set out a variety of different circumstances where consent would not be required. One example is where an owner is required to provide personal information pursuant to the provisions of the Condominium Property Act. One thing that jumps to mind is the notice requirement whenever the owner changes their address. They are required to provide an address for service to the Condo Corporation. Another one would be where the Condo Corporation chooses, where the owner chooses to rent out his or her unit. He or she is required to provide the names of the prospective tenants that are going to be living in that unit. But if you can't find an exception for consent, then the organization is required to obtain it. However, while consent can be obtained orally or in writing, there are also situations in which consent can be deemed. For example, where the individual has voluntarily provided the personal information to the organization, and it is considered reasonable in the circumstances that a person would provide that information. So another important point to take here is that whenever you are collecting, using, or disclosing personal information belonging to an individual, an organization is required to provide that individual with notice. The notice must also include the purpose for the collection, use, or disclosure, and provide a name of the person at the organization who can answer questions about the collection. So namely, your privacy officer. This would be somebody, likely a board member that you have designated to be that go-to person. So the purpose doesn't necessarily need to be stated in the notice if it can be reasonably inferred from the notice itself. And here my example is video cameras being posted at front entrances. As Constable McKinnon described, video cameras are so ubiquitous these days that I think it's reasonable, and the courts have agreed, that people who approach a building and see such a notice that, you know, this building is under video surveillance, that you can reasonably infer that the purpose is for promoting security or enhancing security and preventing theft, vandalism, and other mischief in the building. So with respect to video surveillance specifically, in Alberta, this issue's come up before the Privacy Commissioner only a few times, actually, with respect to condominium corporations, which I found strange, but it is what it is. So this was back in 2006. The Privacy Commissioner first determined that personal information of individuals, as it's defined under the Personal Information Protection Act, is being collected through video surveillance when the image of that individual is recorded on a digital hard drive or videotape. So this means that, yes, when you install video surveillance in your buildings, you are in fact recording people's personal information. So you are collecting that personal information, and as such, the provisions in PIPA apply. Condominium corporations, according to the Condominium Property Act, they're statutorily responsible for the control, management, and administration of all of the corporation's real and personal property and of all common property. This actually is what allows condo corporations to be able to install video surveillance cameras because of that oversight, because of that responsibility. So they can do this as long as they've provided their residents with the proper notice. The reason for this is because individuals have a diminished expectation of privacy in those common areas, such as hallways, stairways, entrances, elevators, even parkades to a certain extent, especially if the cameras themselves are visible and proper notices have been posted that are prominent, advertising of the camera's existence and locations. It's actually a Court of Appeal decision in Ontario that first determined that this was acceptable. And in that case, the court also determined that a condominium corporation was permitted to hand over video footage from common areas to police when requested to do so, when police were investigating a crime. And they can do that without first obtaining consent from the residents. So in Alberta, there's been really just one decision that, that actually addressed video surveillance by a condominium corporation, and this was the Grandin Manor case. This was back in 2016. In that case, an owner had objected to the use of video footage to investigate an alleged bylaw violation against him, and he made a complaint to the privacy commissioner for that reason, but also complaining that the number of cameras was excessive, the positioning of the cameras was intrusive, and that he had not provided consent, and a host of other complaints, actually. So the case considered the use of surveillance systems installed in the common areas. And it found, of course, that according to PIPA, residents and visitors must have notice of the existence and location of the security cameras. In this case, notices were posted at entrances, and moreover, they actually had an image of a camera, which the commissioner found benefited non-English speaking individuals who would, go in and out of the building. So it might not be enough in some circumstances to just have an English description saying, video surveillance, you are being recorded. A picture of a camera, I think, is crucial. So these notices were found sufficient in order for the commissioner to find that consent of the residents and all users of the building could be deemed. Moreover, they found the Condominium Corporation brought forth evidence from their last annual general meeting. They produced the minutes of that meeting showing that there had actually been a vote of the owners, an ordinary resolution, whereby the owners had overwhelmingly approved the addition of video cameras and the number of cameras that were installed in their building. So that was further evidence of them having given consent. The purpose of the video surveillance or collection of personal information, as stated in the notice, was to deter vandalism and promote security. So the the privacy commissioner determined that the corporation was entitled to review the camera's footage in order to investigate any security incidents or criminal events when and if they occurred. However, what the corporation had done in this case was send a warning letter to the unit owner who had complained because they had reviewed footage of him scribbling on a notice board in the common area. And they claimed that constituted a bylaw violation, which they were warning him about. And if he continued doing that, then they intended to fine him. Unfortunately for the corporation, this was not among the stated purposes. This was not an inferred purpose or that could be inferred from the notices that were posted. And this was not something that was discussed by the owners or put to the owners during the AGM. So the corporation could not use the footage to pursue a bylaw violation the way they were doing it. So in summary from that case, we can take from it that anybody who enters your building and sees posted signs alerting of the presence of video cameras and video surveillance, and they choose to enter the building notwithstanding those signs, can be deemed to have provided their consent for the collection of their personal information. That's what voluntary provision of personal information, it's deemed consent. But any other purpose aside from security, promoting security, reducing vandalism, etc., must or should be stated in the notice itself. So if you intend to use video surveillance to pursue bylaw violations, then that needs to be properly stated in the notice. So in an earlier case back in 2006 again, they found that signs notifying individuals of general surveillance in common areas was sufficient. That signs need not specify the reason or use as long as it's reasonably clear from the context, preventing theft, vandalism, mischief. But if you're going to go further than that, like for bylaw violations or for acts of tenants or something like that, then that needs to be stated. Okay, so one of the things that's come up in the past couple of years is the existence of doorbell cameras, and those have been really increasing in popularity. More and more I've seen requests from residents to install doorbell cameras on their front door or to install some form of video surveillance on the exterior of their unit. When that happens, PIPA can still be engaged, which could trigger the condo corporation's duties especially in a circumstance where the common property is involved. So doorbell cameras, in one case out of BC, have actually been found to be considered alterations of the common property. And most condo owners and property managers would recognize that alterations are typically included as provisions in the bylaws, that owners and residents are not permitted to alter the common property without consent or permission from the board. So of course, consent needs to be obtained first. This particular case was a strata or condo in Whistler, BC. It was a mixed 4-story complex. Some of the issues that the tribunal considered was whether the owner required permission in the first place. He was, of course, arguing that it was merely an addition, not an alteration. The court disagreed. He was likening the camera to the existing peephole in his front door or to a cell phone camera. Again, the court disagreed. The tribunal ultimately found that by requiring the owner to remove the doorbell camera, the Strata Corporation was acting within its authority under its bylaws and under provincial legislation in British Columbia, which is comparable to here, but not identical, because it was attached to the common property. In this case, it was, if you consider the difference between a traditional condo and a bare land condo, where traditional condos, doors and windows on the exterior of the unit are, generally speaking, common property. So they are the responsibility of the corporation to repair, maintain, replace, and they are also under the jurisdiction of the condo corporation whenever any alterations are being contemplated. So that decision was followed by a decision called Hare, also in BC. Oddly, I haven't seen any doorbell camera cases outside of BC. It's interesting. But in this case, it was a tenant that had installed a video recording device on the exterior door through the existing peephole without first obtaining approval, and the corporation ordered him to remove it. The tenant was arguing that the layout of the building should affect the outcome of the case because the way that his door faced, he wasn't, you couldn't see any other entrances, you couldn't see any other owners' units or people coming and going. The court disagreed. They said building layout is irrelevant. The issue is the fact that this is installed on common property and it was done without permission. And the purpose was, as the tenant himself stated, to improve security. The tenant, I guess, had been experiencing some harassment or alleged harassment from another resident, and argued that the court should take that into account in allowing him to keep his camera. The court disagreed again and found that this did not reduce the strata or did not undermine the Strata Corporation's decision or make it unreasonable, because the Strata Corporation had to consider its obligations under BC's version of PIPA, and also consider the potential impact of the tenant's camera on the privacy of all residents of the corporation. And it had properly done so in this case by asking the tenant to remove the camera. It's important to note, however, here that BC's legislation is slightly different than Alberta. This legislation varies from province to province. So what's okay here may not be okay in Ontario and vice versa. In BC, their version of PIPA actually prohibits strata corporations from placing any video surveillance cameras on common property unless that strata corporation's bylaws expressly allow for video surveillance and the residents are first notified. In the case I just mentioned, Hare, the strata's bylaws also did not even permit video cameras on the common property. So to go even further, the strata corporation was within its authority to demand that the tenant remove the camera because they weren't even permitted under the bylaws. So taking from these cases that I've developed sort of a set of best practices for condo corporations and for unit owners alike. Number one being that corporations need to develop a privacy policy. Again, I stress this is actually a requirement under PIPA. You must have a privacy policy. And this should set out things such as what kind of information will be collected and what will it be used for. So your examples, these are your purposes. Examples being security, enhancing security, deterring vandalism, deterring crime. But if you also intend to use that footage at any time to pursue a bylaw violations or actions against residents for improper conduct, then you need to state that purpose as well. And that should be spelled out in your policy as well as set out in any notices to residents, such as the ones posted throughout the building. But it should also be brought up at your annual general meeting. Give owners an opportunity to vote on and determine that this is what they want to allow. Second thing is who will be permitted to access this information. Again, I mentioned the need to have a privacy officer designated who is going to be the one person who will actually view the footage. The entire board should not have access to the footage. Only the privacy officer should be allowed to view the footage or should be allowed to permit to view the footage with police or potentially with the property manager. There are some front entrance cameras that have live feeds that are accessible by all residents. I believe that should be discouraged because you can't control that information anymore. The corporation, it's not within your control. Any owner could potentially record that footage and use it for whatever purpose. So that's the reason why it should not be, live feeds are not a good idea. Another thing is how long is the information going to be retained? PIPA requires organizations to only keep the information for as long as reasonably necessary for the purpose for which it was collected, and then thereafter organizations are required to destroy that information. So if you're using it for building security or bylaw violations, consider maybe only keeping it for a couple of days or a week, and then having it be recorded over. Another thing is having the information be kept in a secure location, whether that's on-site or off-site, but it has to be kept in a room that's locked, that's only accessible by the privacy officer, so that it can be kept secure. Finally, how are requests for access to the information by residents going to be treated? You have to have a policy around that as well, because PIPA specifies that any individual can make a request to the organization to access their information at any time. When the organization receives such a request, it has to provide a response within 45 days. The response must disclose who has seen this information, who it's been used by, and for what purpose. So as I said, just to kind of recap, you want to state the purpose for the surveillance cameras on any notices that are posted at entrances. You want to try and obtain owner approval at AGMs and record the result of any votes in the minutes for that meeting. You want to appoint a privacy officer, and then you want to communicate this to residents. Once you have your policy in place and your officer appointed, you want to make sure that residents know who to contact. For resident security cameras, residents who want to install security cameras, the goal should be to minimize the privacy intrusion on other residents. I don't believe that it would be a good practice for condo corporations to simply deny all such requests or to have a policy in place that they will not permit these in any circumstances. Wherever there is discretion in your bylaws, such as making alterations to common property, and there typically is, corporations are required to exercise that discretion in a reasonable way, which means not arbitrarily refusing such requests. So with each request, you have to consider it and provide a reasoned response, either yes or no, as to why they can or cannot have that camera. For permitting such cameras, your policy should detail that first a request for approval is required, that the board will consider these requests, and give information about what the owner or resident will have to provide with that kind of request. For example, maybe getting a still image of the potential camera's footage to determine its field of view and what it's actually collecting. You'll want information about how this thing is activated, how long images are stored, whether it records at all, or whether it just live feeds to a cell phone, for example. So I'm just gonna flip. Your policy on residents installing security cameras on the common property should also probably notify other adjacent residents that there has been such a request and allow them an opportunity to respond, to object to it. You want to consider the location of the camera, the direction it's facing, and what areas they're actually capturing. And for residents, number one, make the request. Make sure that you obtain consent, because if you do not, then that's grounds for the condo corporation to require you to remove it or to remove it themselves. Okay. I guess one other thing is the board should consider if the camera can be installed without damaging the common property, installed and then removed later without damaging the common property. Failing which, you might want to consider getting an undertaking from that owner that any damage they cause, they will be responsible for. Just another tip I just thought of. Okay, and that's about it in a nutshell.
Thank you very much, Erin. Lots to digest in there, and I can tell by just the volume of questions we're getting in. It is a topic of much discussion that way. Beverly, you had a quick poll question that we'll do just before we'll start doing the Q&A with Erin. And the question is, does your complex currently use surveillance cameras? Very simple. Just one additional point Erin had made regarding the privacy policy. At our website in the Resource Center, we actually have a template of a privacy policy that Service Alberta put out, which has the basic guts of a privacy policy, and then it allows the corporation to put in the details as it pertains to their particular complex. So you'll find that in the Resource Center on the CCI North Alberta website. So the results of our poll: does your complex currently use surveillance cameras? This is a surprise to me. 61% said yes, 37% said no, and 2% weren't sure if the cameras were there or not there. So thank you very much. So Erin, we'll start with some of the questions here. Somebody just wanted clarification what you meant by PIPA does not apply to individuals.
Okay, so the obligations that are set out under the provincial legislation only apply to organizations. Organizations are required to comply with them. Organizations are required to have these policies in place and use these practices. Individuals who use video surveillance, like on cell phone cameras or otherwise, are not subject to those requirements whatsoever. But however, like I said, when an individual is using is installing a video camera on common property that is under the care and control of the corporation, then the corporation's duties under PIPA might be engaged.
Okay. Next question: can a condo board collect and store information about the comings and goings of people with access via a fob entry system?
Yes, that's another way that personal information can be collected, because you'll have your fobs, you'll have your fobs numbered and assigned to residents. So that data would be collected and potentially stored someplace. You'll need to have a policy concerning that as well. It's no different, I think, than video surveillance footage recording the comings and goings in visual images. So.
Yeah, I'd be struggling to see the reasoning behind trying to track people coming and going at a time, but there may be isolated cases where that may play, I guess. Next question is it allowed to say that a property may be under surveillance when it may not be? What legal liabilities come from this statement?
I think that potentially gives residents a false sense of security. If you're saying it may be under video surveillance, or say, for example, I've seen instances where people say you are under video surveillance when in fact you're not, and they've posted fake cameras in locations. Yeah, I think I haven't examined that issue in much detail, but I think it could potentially attract some liability for a condo corporation that does that.
Yeah.
So
I would definitely agree on that, over the old overpromise and underdeliver. Yeah. A question came in that's kind of an open-ended question, but I'm see if you can put some clarity to it. Would you advise condo management to post pictures from CCTV of individuals. I would assume this is in the case of and I guess maybe that's the question, is when would that be appropriate?
I think it would only be appropriate in the case of a criminal investigation, for example, a break-in situation, where you've recorded images of people entering the building or entering a parkade and stealing bicycles, for example, or vandalizing vehicles, and you don't know who they are and you're trying to identify them. I think it'd be permissible in those circumstances, but again, going back to the purpose for which you collected the information in the first place, I think that is important. If your purpose is to investigate bylaw violations, then it's potentially permissible to post images of somebody engaged in a bylaw violation where there's no corresponding criminal investigation. But I would be very careful in that case. So.
Okay. After the installation of cameras, could a corporation notify the owners that video footage would also be used for bylaw or policy infractions? And I guess a follow-up to that would be, would it be best handled through an ordinary resolution at a general meeting, or can a corporation just after the fact say that we're now collecting information for bylaw infractions as well?
Well, I think that doing it after the fact is never a good idea. I think if you're but if yes, let's say you already have video cameras installed and you want to clarify your purposes, then first thing you do need to provide your owners with notice. As a good idea, I recommend transparency, and I recommend giving owners the opportunity to give feedback and potentially vote on whether or not they think that that's a legitimate purpose or a legitimate use for those security cameras. So it may be a good idea after you've provided that notice to residents to include that on your agenda for the next at the next annual general meeting, and give owners a chance to vote on it. Okay.
If we have cameras, should we have signs showing and stating where the cameras are?
That actually, it does help when trying to ascertain whether or not consent has been deemed, whether the person captured on the footage has voluntarily provided this information. If you can't see the cameras and you can't see the notice, then it's meaningless, and I don't think that you can infer consent from that. I think if the cameras are visible, the more visible the cameras are, and the more visible and prominent the notices are, then the better off the corporation is in terms of defending itself against any complaints down the road.
Okay. We've had a couple of questions regarding the scenarios that have been brought up, like case law and that, have been more apartment-style buildings. So does anything change when we're talking about a townhome complex as opposed to apartment-style building when it comes to security cameras?
Well, again, I think it depends on the type of condominium, not necessarily the building layout, but the type, whether we're dealing with a traditional or a bareland condo.
Bareland, yeah.
If it's a bareland condo and an owner has decided to install a video surveillance on the exterior of their unit, which is part of their unit, it's not common property, then that should be within their right, provided that their video camera isn't overly intrusive into the privacy of their next door neighbors, for example. But their next door neighbors' recourse might be through a complaint to the board in nuisance, or through the catch-all bylaw provision, like use of a unit that unduly interferes with an owner's use and enjoyment of their unit. So you got to consider other potential bylaw infractions when an owner puts up a video camera. In a traditional condo, on the other hand, where an owner has installed video surveillance on the exterior of the unit, the exterior of the unit is common property. So that engages the corporation's duties, and that engages the right of the corporation to provide approval, and the corresponding necessity of the owner to have first obtain consent.
All right, we just got we're almost out of time here. I've got two more questions here. One, if bylaws required board permission to alter common property, can the board enact a blanket rule that permits doorbell cameras on hallway doors without individual unit owners having to seek permission?
That's similar to developing a policy, I suppose, but I don't think that a blanket permission should be granted. I think that each case should be considered separately by the board. I think that that's probably just a good habit to be in. You do want to make sure, because it is common property, the board is responsible for it, that these cameras that are being installed aren't damaging the common property, number one. So they're being installed in a safe and proper manner, and they are capable of being removed down the road without doing damage. And number two, that it's not going to unduly interfere with another resident, with their privacy or with their use of their unit.
Okay, last question. Should the privacy policy officer and policy be put into the bylaws, as bylaws are the only way to actually sanction or fine an owner?
I think that, like, what I've been doing when I'm drafting bylaws is I include a provision that the board will develop a privacy policy from time and may amend that policy from time to time. And violation of that privacy policy, thereby it gives you a bylaw provision that you can then use if the privacy policy is breached. So.
Okay. And sorry, I forgot one. Is audio recording permitted? Or is that another policy altogether?
I think that would be another policy altogether. I also don't see necessarily the utility in audio recording necessarily, because it doesn't, it's not as valuable in helping to identify somebody, which is the whole point, I think, of surveillance cameras, to be able to see who it was who did X or Y or Z. So yeah, I think that you would need a separate policy just to deal with audio, but unfortunately, I don't have any case law that talks about whether an audio recording of somebody is personal information. Because again, without doing like voice analysis, you can't determine that this voice was this person with any certainty or accuracy. So, yeah.
Very true, very true. But we did see your picture, so we know it was you that did the presentation.
Yes.
We've had a number of questions regarding the presentation itself. We will be sending everybody a link to the whole presentation that will have the slide and content on it. We'll also, there's been some questions regarding the sample privacy policy. We'll include the link to that part as well for people to view that. I want to thank both our presenters. Constable McKinnon had to leave for other duties there, so he's already gone. But I want to thank him and Erin for their great presentation today and all the detailed information. There's lots to absorb here. The beauty of having this recorded is that we can all take a look at our convenience and go through things and start following up on some of the things that we need to do within our corporation. So just before we go, I'll let you know we'll have a online survey of the seminar sent out to you tomorrow for feedback. Our apologies once again for the technical difficulties at the beginning. We did 2.5 dry runs and everything worked perfectly, and sure enough we get to the live event and everything goes to heck in a, well, you know what it is.